Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to start the Chulin daf Nun Gimel. We are going to begin on Nun Gimel with about 8 lines or so from the top, learning about Drusa, learning about this idea how a animal with its claws could, at least according to the simple explanation, put this eres, this poisonous venom, into their prey and end up killing them. We saw in yesterday's daf a great explanation that it doesn't necessarily mean that there is poison on their claws. There's no venom that these animals have. For example, a cat or a wolf, all these different animals. But rather, it has to do with certain levels of bacteria that are developed on their paws, on their claws, and by inserting that inside and cutting into their prey's flesh, so what ends up happening is there's a massive infection, and because of that, it spreads, and that's how they die. So this is a very interesting idea, certainly before antibiotics, how dangerous certain bacterial infections could be, how many different types of things could take place. So, boy Ravashi, Shar Ophos Tameyan, Yeshchen Druso Elhen Drusa. So, we've been mentioning in yesterday's daf about a hawk, nates, and that is certainly an animal that has the capacity to kill with its claws. So, the question is, does that apply to other birds as well? Ophos Tameyan, non-kosher birds, in which they generally, among their simonim, you could see by their claws that the way that they're shaped, and they're birds of prey. Omale Rav Hillel Rav Ashi Ki Avinin Be Rav Kahana Omer Shar Ophos Tameyan Yeshan Derusa. Yeah, it's true. Those also have the capacity to kill with their venom, with their claws. Let's just say it that way. What do you mean? It says specifically that when it comes specifically to a nate, when it comes to a hawk, it's ba'oif hadak. It has the capacity to kill small birds. So it's mashma that only a nates and nothing else. Our answer is drusas and nates bidikuvase. It's just telling us that a nates has ability to kill more. For example, a nates can kill an animal, a bird, its own size. The enoch, however, the other birds could kill, however, only b'zutraminayu. They could only damage birds that are smaller than them. Some say it a little bit differently, that Drisas and nates b'deravimine, that a hawk even could damage something bigger than it. The enoch, the other birds, b'dikavosaihu, only birds which are the same size. Either way, a hawk has greater power. Rav Kahana Mishmeda Rav Shimi Barashi Ein Drusel Shoyel. When it comes to a fox, it doesn't have the capacity to kill with its claws, with its venom. Eini v'hakiyasa Rav Dimi Omer Masiv Ador Shoyel Rachel b'merchatz shel b'nei hini, that there was a fox that did damage to a sheep in near a bathhouse. It must be because yesh drusa. So what are you talking about? We see a shayil is yesh drusa. Rav Safra hahi chatul havi. It wasn't a fox. It was actually, after further investigation, it was a cat. That again, a fox can do drusa. In this place, and they said ein drusa. So Rav Safra ahu kelav havoy. It was a dog. Okay, so in other words, a dog there is no Derusa. But when it comes to a fox, maybe there is Derusa. Okay. Rav Yosef. Naktina, in our tradition, we say in Derusa l'kelev, that a dog does not have Derusa. It could scratch, but nonetheless, in Derusa, we're talking not with its teeth. We're talking about scratching. Because a dog also may have rabies, but that's specifically from the mouth, from biting, not from scratching necessarily. So, at least, obviously, I'm talking about nowadays, but back then, maybe these things didn't exist. So, Ein Derusa l'kelev. So, Rabbi Natinin, Ein Derusa, okay, that's it. So, Ein Derusa el biyad, lafuki regel deloy. So, first of all, the only time we say that an animal will do damage and will kill is with its forepaws, with its forelegs, not the hind legs, not the back. Fuku regel deloy. And we understand, because you can understand, an animal attacks like this with its hands, not with its legs, its back legs. Ein Derusa el b'tzipaydin, lafuki shein deloy. When we're talking about Derusa, we're specifically talking about the claws, but not teeth. As Rashi says, the ein eres hechaya b'shineha. There's no eres in its teeth. Again, it makes sense. The claws, and when they're retractable claws, so there's bacteria, but it's external, so it doesn't affect the animal itself. But if you would have bacteria internally in the mouth, then it would kill the animal itself, right? So it makes sense why that's the interpretation. Furthermore, ein Derusa el madas. It's only when the animal intends to do it. Because it has retractable paws, it makes sense that sometimes it will want to do it and sometimes it won't. So you can get a little scratch, but it won't be as significant as if it wants to do so. Afuke shlo madas lo. Now Rashi gives an example over here. What's shlo madas? Givan shlo madas nafal kegain minagag al behema. Let's say an animal just slides off of a high place on a roof and lands on an animal. Afal pi she niskat siparno begaba ein mashach ba eres. Even though it may bang the back of the animal with its paws, and maybe its claws could scratch it a bit, that's not enough to do Derusa. Again, it makes sense because it's only a violent act where they stick their claws as deeply as possible into their prey. That's where the highest level of bacteria could take place. Ein Derusa el machayim lafukil achamisa. It's only while the animal's alive, but not after it died. Says Rashi, Shemesa Ari, the animal died, V'achakach nafal al habehema, and then it falls on an animal. Okay, Delo. So Amri hashta shlomadas, without intent, Amrit loy slachamisa boy. An animal that's dead obviously doesn't have any das because it's dead. So why do you even have to mention that case? That can't be what it means. Lo sricha didages upaskuha liyade. Let's say it was Doris, and we chop the hand off of the animal while it's maybe still alive, and then it dies. So Ma'adatema Bahadi the Doris Shadi Zahare Kamashmalan Bahadi the Shav Shadi Zahara. You would think because let's say it's attacking and you got to kill this animal because it's going crazy. So, but it already had in its lifetime stuck its claws into the prey. So then it's killed, it doesn't accomplish anything. Because Bahadi the Shalif, it's only when it pulls it out is when literally the venom comes out, but not when it enters. It's an interesting thing. So if they don't actively pull it out, then it's not going to cause any damage. Okay, it's something to think about based on what we're saying, how we understand that case, but that's the simple explanation. Let's look at question TA21. Rabbi, Natinan in Derusa Ella blank. What are the four things that Derusa is coming to exclude? So he said it's the hand and not the regel, the claws and not the teeth. It has to be with das and not shomadas, and has to be while it's alive, not lachar misa, as we said, if let's say you cut the hand or something like that while you killed it, so then that would be an answer. Okay, all right. Okay, let's keep on moving then. Omer Rabba bar Rav Huna Omer Rav. Arisha nichnas lebein hashvarim. So let's say you have a lion that enters among a bunch of bulls. And the lion is the king of the jungle, and it could do a whole lot of damage over there. So what happened? The nimsa siparin begabo shel echad mehen. We find that the back of one of these bulls has these nails stuck into it. And Rashi says, Telusha begav. It was detached. So the question is, did it come from this lion? And therefore, drusa, we should be chayshish that this shore is a treifa and you can't shecht it. So, ein chayshishim shema ari darsa. We're not concerned that it was this lion that did it. My timer. Rova rayois darsan. The truth is, the majority of lions do claw. However, mutant ain't darsan. There's some that don't. The whole Darius and Siparnu nishmetas. However, when an animal does drusa, it doesn't release its claws; they stay. So the fact is, this is a little bit strange, even though the majority of lions do drusa. But in all cases, when they do it, they're not going to leave their claws behind; they'll leave marks behind. The Zos in this situation, Hoyel v'Siparnu Yosheves Lo because he has nails stuck inside, Amor bekoisel nischachich. Maybe what actually happened was this bull rubbed its back against the wall, and there happened to be some of the fingernails or claws, if you will, in the wall. However, those nails were not connected to the claws in which were venomous. Again, let's just use it that language. So therefore, because of that, we're not concerned. Adarab, what do you mean? Should say the opposite. Roid shvarim nischachin. We know the bulls are always rubbing their backs against walls. Umiyutin ein mischachin. Some bulls don't. The chol hamischachich ein siparn yosheves lo begaboy. However, when an animal rubs itself against the back of its back against a wall, there's not nails that get stuck into his back. But since we see that there are these claws in his back, it's probably because it was this lion that did it. And maybe it is a treifa. So so you can look at it either way. So ukimilsa a chazaka. So therefore, instead, what we'll do is we'll place him on the chazaka. So havile suffix on it's chazaka. That it's the animal's a kosher animal. So havili suffix drusa, and this is of course a case of a doubt. We're not chayshish of a suffix drusa, so it could have happened. If we saw it happen, then we're chayshish, of course. But if we're not sure, it could be hanging it on something else. So then we'll say that it's probably not an issue. Rabbi, lo amron elotzi pirate. We only say this if you actually see the clause in there. Let's say you see a bunch of the marks of it, then that's a problem. Why? Because we said because this is not normal for a lion to leave claws behind. So the fact is, if you see the marks, that means that the claws are not left behind. And if this lion is probably the one that did it. But when it comes to just seeing the nails stuck inside the back of the bull, that we're not so concerned, is if the blood is moist. Let's say it's dry, it could be that it fell off, and therefore we must be suspect. There's a moist claw will not come off. Only when it's dry, we are chayshish, right? So that's what we're saying. The whole issue is If it's dry, so maybe it fell off. So the fact that it's there or it's not there, right? It's something to be concerned of when it's dry. If there's one, okay, fine, maybe not so afraid, because again, a moist claw will not come off by drusa. If you see 2 or 3, then already we're concerned. So it has to be in like some type of row, says Rashi. So if you see like they're all scratched, you can see that they're lined up just like the typical swiping of a lion's claws, but if one's here, one's there, one's there, so then it's not so push it necessarily. We assume that that's was the lion that did it. Question 13. A lion that entered among bulls, one nail in the back of an animal, so the simple answer is we're not chayish l'drusa, but it's not necessarily. We say tziparin lacha pulta the Rabbi Shmuel. If it's moist, it's a machlokis, and tziparin yavesha, if it's dry, then definitely chayshishin. Okay, so that is Rav Latameh, who said Omer by lo morin el tziparin. So according to Rav, he's not chayshish l'savik derusa, and when it's lach, when it's yavesh, when it's dry, then we are chayshish. Okay, all right. Because we did this a little bit too slow. We should have continued over here because I didn't finish this piece. Itmar Rav Omer ein chayshishin l'savik derusa, Shmuel Omer chayshin l'savik derusa. Right, so we see clearly it's a machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Right, Rav and Shmuel disagree whether we're chayshin l'savik derusa. So therefore, it makes sense. Even malach, Rav is going to Shmuel is going to be chayshish. The kuli yalma safek al safek lu'ol emulu'ol. So let's say we don't even know if the lion entered into the bull's den. We have no idea if the this lion entered where the bulls were, so we're not going to be chayshish there at all. Safek kalba safek shunra ema kalba. And we don't know if it was a dog or a cat, and here a shunra, a lion is among the cat family, but it means an animal that potentially was dirus, ema kalba. We'll just assume it's a dog, and a dog is not dirus. So again, in the case of doubt, if we don't know, we never actually saw it enter, we don't know which animal it was, we're going to be lenient. Oil shosik, let's say the lion entered quietly, Yisaisif b'naihu, and it's like pretty quiet over there, so we'll say Emer Shalma Shavya. So maybe it was peaceful. So that's right. Also Shalom Imahem, maybe they made peace. Kederach Kamachayos Shenasos Tarvus V'Gadlos Im B'nei Adam V'Behema V'Ein Mazikin. It's very possible that you have animals that could be among each other, and you could even technically come across a wild animal. Doesn't mean it's going to kill you. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's not guaranteed it's going to happen. So everything was quiet and you didn't hear anything, then probably no violent act took place. And therefore you don't have to be chayshish l'drusa. Cut the reisha dechad minayu. Let's say the lion chopped off the head or ripped the head off of one of these bulls. So we know obviously that animal's treif. It's not, or it's in nevela, right? It's nothing to talk about. Noch merische. Perhaps its anger dissipated. In other words, just because we know it killed and was violent toward bull number 1 doesn't mean anything for bull number 2. Maybe it just needed to get that release and kill one of them. So it doesn't prove anything about the other one in question. Ihu ka ma'aviv inun karkarin. So ba'usi ka mis'asi hadadi. So let's say there was a whole lot of noise, so there was screaming and growling. Says Rashi, Giyois Delashin Saka Ari luchud v'loshen sakas kol behemo luchud. So you heard the lion growling, which is not a fun sight, especially if they're growling in your direction. And you hear a bunch of screaming from all the animals. So it could be that they were just afraid of one another. Which, again, these are a bunch of kulas over here. If you look in Rashi on Amud Beis, Tikishem shehem nivasim imenu kachu nivas mehem ve'ein lochosh. So what animals sometimes will do is they'll make a lot of noise and scare. So even though it's a lion, but nonetheless, the lion may not be interested in attacking a very wild bull. So if the bull starts making noise, so then maybe the lion didn't attack either. Let's say the lion didn't growl, but the other animals made a whole lot of noise. Marsavar Masako Oven, but who must be because he attacked these animals and they're crying out of pain. Marsavar Machmas Biasusihu de Ka Avdan. It was only out of fear that it made those noises, but it doesn't mean anything actually happened. Amar Meimer Hilchas Achayshel Nosevik Drusa. We talk about holding Shmuel that were Chayshish. Amar Rav Ashel Meimer Hai de Rav. This opinion of Rav who's lenient. My or Malay Lo Shmili Kalemar Lo Svirli. I don't hold of him. The boy saying a Hadar Be Rav Gabi Shmuel. Maybe he retracted and he actually agreed with Shmuel. Dahu Sharkafa the Sufik Drusos. There was a case, as Rashi says, a salmoli oifais, a basket of birds that Rashi says shenichnas hanetz b'neihem, and a hawk went into them, which again has the capacity of doing derusa. Yosef came to Rav, Shadrin who came to Shmuel. So they sent this in front of Shmuel to ask him what the deal is with these birds. Are they treifa? So chankinhu, so he it choked them, v'shadinhu ben nahara, and threw them into the river, right? So so if it's true, you think Rab didn't retract, lishrinhu, he should have said they were a mutter. Elamai haderbe, so maybe he did in fact agree to Shmuel, then lisrinhu, just make them usher, right? So why didn't he just simply say it's usher and like Shmuel? El asr Shmuel havi. This, he didn't want to paskin in Shmuel's town, so he let him do it, and he didn't asr it, right? So lamoli lemichinkinhu. So why strangle them? Lishdinhu hachi benahar, and put them into the river. So mifarchan v'tzalkan. Basically, they should just fly away and go. Says Rashi, v'sadanois v'yimchu Yisrael. Because the problem is, if they would fly away, what will end up happening is that Yisrael will capture them, and then they'll think they're kosher, and that could become problematic. So better just kill them. L'shdinhu shnei maser chaydish. So why don't you just hold on to them for 12 months? Because, as Rashi says, kedin safek treifa. Just wait for 12 months, and then after 12 months they'll die, or maybe they won't die, and there won't be a treifa. You can't keep these things hanging around for 12 months, because since they're along so long, a person may end up eating one of them. So sell it to an akum. Because it doesn't mean, just because it's a treifa doesn't mean you have to destroy it. It's mutter bahana. So also lumazvinhu Yisrael. We're concerned that he may turn around and sell it to a yid. Okay. Lechankinhu leshdinhu laashba. So why throw into the river? Put into the garbage heap. So according to your reasoning, you have a kasha for that. Nishdinhu leklavim. Why doesn't he just throw it to the dogs? Ela leparsume milsa di isura. He wanted to specifically demonstrate that it was 100% usher. So when he went to the river, everyone was like, what's he doing in the river? So Avsha Milsa Tfei, as Rashi says, there's going to create a bigger buzz. There'll be more noise about it. Says Rashi, Lafisha Ofus Dakin, there are small birds, Barubim Hoy, there's so many, Lo Yochel Boidkan Latirin Bebedika. He couldn't just examine them. Imneha Tairich. He may make a mistake, fine. So therefore, because of that, he wanted to make a spectacle to demonstrate In fact, the halacha is like Shmuel. The hoop or avza, there was an aves, a goose, or called a duck. The Havibe Rabashi, al Beni Kanya, and it was by the reeds. Nafik went out also kime masmes Korea Dama. It was filled with blood. It was actually meluchloch. It was filled with blood. So maybe something attacked it. So Ravashi lo amrin and savik kalba, savik shunra, amer kalba. Well, we don't say this. We have this whole din of maybe it was a dog, maybe it was a cat. So we'll just be lenient with a dog. So hachinami savik kanya, savik shunra, amer kanya, michya. So you could say the same thing, right? That maybe it was a cat, maybe it was something else. So we'll just assume it was something else. It was the reeds that cut it up. So Amri b'nei Rav Chia derusa shomer sricha b'dika keneged b'nei moyim. So whenever we said this case of that it's a derusa, we have to examine it. We have to examine keneged the b'nei moyim, the innards. Says Rashi, gaba, its back, v'krisa, its stomach, v'sideha, its sides. The chosh keneged b'nei moyim, anything which is opposite the innards. V'im ha'adim shem bas sham basar. We want to see if there's redness over there. Zeu eres, that will demonstrate that there was this bacterial infection, which is red and rash and very and spreading. The tarfa shesofa lisroif, it's going to end up burning like these infections do. Until it could make a hole. Vimul hadim basar, let's say there's no blood there, no redness. You don't have to check anymore. You only have to check keneged b'nei moyim. So it's not going to become a problem anywhere else. Some Rav Yosef, b'nei Rav Chia kvar pirsha Shmuel. So this was actually already explained by Shmuel. The Shmuel, Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Antigonus, derusa she'amar sricha b'dika keneged b'nei moyim. So he said the same thing. Boy Ilfa. So in this, Ilfa asked the question: Yesh Jerusalem simanim or ain Jerusalem simanim? So when it comes to an attack on an animal's esophagus or trachea, do we say that will make it treifa, or do we say that part of the animal is pretty hard and therefore not concerned of Jerusalem? So Rav Zera hadaboy ilfa kfar pirsha Rav Chanan bar Rava. This was actually explained as well. Yom Rav Chanan bar Rava and Rav Derusa Shomer Sricha B'dika Kanei Beis HaChalal Kuloi. You have to check the entire innards. Rashi says to exclude the thickness of the neck or the thigh. V'afil b'simanim, and this is the key line. Even the simanim, it's possible of Derusa. So boy Ilfa. So now Ilfa asks a question. Simanim she nidaldalu, when you have these simanim which become dislocated or attached, so bekama, with how much? Rav Zera had the boy Ilfa kfar pirsha Rabba Barbarchana. See, there's a little bit of a pattern over here. This is already explained. The Yamar Rabba Barbarchana Amar Shmuel simanim she nidaldalu baruban. If the simanim were moved significantly, dislocated, as long as it's the majority. Boy Ravami, hamismasa mahu. If the thigh got clawed, so actually darsa b'yerech, what's the din? Rav Zera hadaboy Ravami. That question kfar pirsha Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda imarav b'derusa ad shiyadim basar keneged b'nei moyim. So we have to check as long as to see if there's redness keneged b'nei moyim. However, nis masmes, if the flesh decays, habasar, then roin oisu ki'ul einoi. We view that as though it's not there. Says Rashi, we see that there's a hole afterwards, right? So if the flesh is like decaying, so we say it's kilu, like it's not there. So hechidami nismasmes. What does it mean that it's decaying? So Rav Huna Berei Rabbi Yeshua Kol Shaharoife Gardoi. If you have a medic that scrapes the flesh away, Umamido al Basar Chai, and there's flesh, healthy flesh in that place. So that demonstrates that flesh there is really deteriorating and decayed. Rav Kahana Isa Kaman Hahi Reya. He was presented a lung. The Chihavi Meisvila Yasvish Shapir. When it was basically just there, it was fine. The Chihavi Medalu, when it was like lifted up, Havi Tilcha Venafla Tilchi. So it started crumbling. So as it was seemingly fine. However, once it was moved, it caused problems. It started falling apart. V'tarifna. So that doesn't matter. Even it looks good, but the reality is, if you lift it up, it starts crumbling into treifa. Rav Huna ber Rav Yeshua. Rav Nachman Aimer b'kites. If there's a thorn that's stuck, ad shetinake v'chalal. Only if there's a hole in the cavity of the animal. Says Rashi, Avol Hagil Chalav, it only reaches the inner cavity. Yeshloch Hashem and Nikva Hadakin, there could be a hole in the intestines. Ubadika Yeshim Shein Nekev Dak Nikr Behen. Such a small hole is not ascertainable. You can't see it. But Derusa, when it comes to again the clawing, Mishiadim Basar. Kenegim Neimayim, as we said before, we look for redness. Rav Zvid Masni Hachim, the Rusa Mishiadim Basar Kenegim Neimayim. Simanim, when it comes to the Simanim, which we said before, there's Baru that were detached or dismantled or moved, the majority. Here it says, An Shiadminu Simanim Atzman. It's only when the actual Simanim look red. Amra Papi Boirav Bibi Barabai. So a question was posed as we continue Nud Dalam and Aleph. Veshet Nikvaso B'mashu. We know that what makes a treifa by the veshet, by the esophagus, even the smallest hole. But the Durusaso B'mashu. It makes sense. Therefore, when it comes to the Durusa, even the smallest amount will also make it into a treifa. Kana Nikvaso B'kister. We know when it comes to the kana, the windpipe, it's a larger size for it to become a treifa, the size of an isser coin. So Durusasu B'kama. You think maybe it should also be an isser. So Boston boy Hadar Pashta B'mashahu. So my timer, what's the reason? Shouldn't it be an isser? No, because the hara mikl koli v'ozl, because the venom or the bacteria will spread throughout the entire animal. So it's interesting. It doesn't make any difference, because once venom or the enters, right, or some bacteria enters, it doesn't matter if the hole is this big or that big. The reality is it's going to do damage and kill the animal. We're going to stop there. Question 14. Drusa sakana bekama reichiv sarach shiadim. How umayshna benekuva shehi b'ki'isr. It's a great question. We just did. Though when it comes to the kana, even a mashahu of Derusa. However, when it comes to a stama hole, it's the size of an isser. And the reason is because poison from the claws will burn through and cause damage, as opposed to without the poison. So it's only if it's the size of an isser will it actually do anything. Question TA 21. We saw that. TA 22. Do you have to do examining the stomach, or more? So we said im keneged simanim boy bedika, or the ein treifa keneged has simanim. So we said Derusa Shamar Tzricha B'dika Keneged B'nei Mayim. Yesh Derusa L'Simanim or Ein Derusa L'Simanim. So this was a question, and we said that you do need B'dika V'afil B'Simanim. Okay. So why is there a question here? Im Keneged L'Simanim Boy B'dika or the in Treifa Keneged L'Simanim. Let's just look over. Let's see, maybe a Rashi over here that I may have missed. Okay, so again, this was the question: is there Derusa b'Simanim or not? And here it says V'afilu b'Simanim, but in fact it's a dispute. One says Ein Treifa Keneged L'Simanim, or there is Keneged L'Simanim, and therefore it does require B'dika. Okay. That's TA22. TB24. Zav. Shenafel min agag al behema daka v'nivka tziparna b'gaba him chayshishin l'derusa umadua. Zav. Okay. I'm not sure why I mentioned Zav. I would say that if it's Shenafel min agag, I would say it's maybe going on this Rashi over here. Kigayin min hagag al behema alva bi shenizka tziparna b'gaba in mashach ba'eres. Right. So that's got to be what I'm looking for here. That it's only madas when I write. If it's to save itself, this is not the worst answer either. In Derusa, maybe actually this is where the answer is. Let's say in yesterday's daf. Malkam Shem Atzilin. Right, so Derusa says Zav, right? So maybe this is what they're looking for. So the Behemim and the Himmel Mal Oifos, Derusa Zav Badaka, Derusas Ari Begasa. So that's first of all, right? That a Derusa of a Zav can kill a small animal, right? Maybe that's what it's looking for, and maybe it's looking for more than that. Then I also wrote Hatzalas Atzma. Let's see. Malkam Shem Atzil and Derusa. Okay, that's yesterday's daf. So I would also throw in, so Zav should, so I wrote, if it's to save itself from its enemies, then Nafsha, then Lahatzel Nafsha, then it may, okay, I don't know. I'm not sure if that's the right answer. I would start off by writing like this. I would say exactly what the Gemara writes, that Derusas Hazav is Bedaka. Okay, that's first of all. And I would say, Aval Dafka Midas. Below Shalom Midas. Like if it falls off a roof. That's exactly what Rashi says, right? So, I'm not sure if that's what he wants, right? Because Shalom Adas, Kivan Shalom Adas, Kagain Nafal, Kagain Min Hagag, Al Behem, Alphapi Shinivka, Siparna Begaba, in Mashach Ba'eres. I think that's probably a good answer. Zav Shinafal Min Hagag. I don't know why it has to use the word Zav. Al Behema Daka. It says a small animal. So you see already it mentions in the question Behema Daka, so that's not what they want. Him Chayshla Derusa. And I think the answer, just Pasha, is Shalom Das or Das. That's my take. Unless you want to, it could be Hatzalas Atzma. It could be, maybe I was on the right track also. Hatzalas Atzmai. Adkan.